Looking back, it feels surreal to think about how it all started. Emma and I had been married for 12 years, and while our relationship wasn't perfect, I thought it was solid. We'd built a life together that felt comfortable, maybe too comfortable. I'm Liam, 38, a logistics manager who thrives on structure and predictability. Emma, 36, is a corporate team leader who's always been the more ambitious one in our partnership. While I enjoyed the steady pace of my career, Emma loved the challenges and constant movement of hers. She often talked about climbing the ladder and making a name for herself, and I supported her every step of the way. We shared dreams of traveling more once her schedule calmed down and my career allowed for more flexibility. We talked about remodeling the kitchen or adding a deck to the backyard, little projects that gave us something to look forward to. At home, we divided responsibilities well enough, though we sometimes struggled to find time for each other. With both of us working demanding jobs, our evenings were often spent decompressing in front of the TV or catching up on emails. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Or at least, I thought it did. Things started to shift a few months ago. Emma had always been busy, but her work demands seemed to increase overnight. She started coming home later, saying she had back-to-back meetings or team-building exercises. At first, I didn't question it. She was good at what she did, and I knew her company relied on her. But there was a subtle change in her demeanor that I couldn't ignore. She seemed more distant, less engaged when we were together. Conversations that used to flow naturally felt stilted, like she was holding something back. "You're working a lot these days," I mentioned one evening as we sat down to dinner. "Yeah, it's been crazy," she replied, barely looking up from her plate. "We've got a big project coming up, and everyone's putting in extra hours." I nodded, not wanting to press her. Emma had always been passionate about her job, and I didn't want to seem unsupportive. But as the weeks went on, the late nights became more frequent, and her excuses started to feel rehearsed. She stopped mentioning specific projects or colleagues, instead brushing off my questions with vague answers like, "Just the usual work stuff." I told myself I was overthinking it. We'd been together for over a decade, and she'd never given me a reason to doubt her. Still, something didn't feel right. And as it turned out, I wasn't the only one noticing the cracks. The first seed of doubt came from an unexpected source, a mutual acquaintance, someone who worked in Emma's office. We bumped into each other at a coffee shop, and after some casual small talk, they mentioned something that caught me off guard. "So, how's Emma enjoying all those late-night brainstorm sessions with Mark?" they asked with a knowing smile. "Mark?" I repeated, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Yeah, you know, her colleague. Everyone's been talking about how close they've gotten lately. Guess it's good for team morale, right?" I forced a chuckle, but my stomach churned. I didn't know who Mark was, and Emma had never mentioned him. The comment could have been harmless, just office gossip blown out of proportion. But it planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. That night, as I watched Emma type away on her laptop, I found myself wondering if there was more to her late nights than just work. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a journey that would unravel everything I thought I knew about our marriage. After hearing that offhand comment about Emma and her colleague Mark, I couldn't stop thinking about it. At first, I told myself it was probably just workplace gossip. Offices were breeding grounds for rumors, and people loved to speculate about others' lives. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. I started paying closer attention to Emma's behavior. She had always been meticulous about separating work from home, rarely bringing up her colleagues unless I asked. But now, even when I did ask, her answers felt different. "How's work been?" I asked one evening as she scrolled through her phone on the couch. "Busy," she replied without looking up. "What about your team? Everyone getting along?" She shrugged. "Yeah, it's fine." Her vagueness wasn't new, but now it carried an edge of defensiveness that hadn't been there before. The next morning, Emma left for work earlier than usual, claiming she had a breakfast meeting with her team. As I sipped my coffee and scrolled through emails, I caught myself wondering who else would be at that breakfast. Was Mark going to be there? I hated how paranoid I was becoming, but I couldn't help it. The comment from our acquaintance had opened a door I couldn't close. Later that day, while running errands, I bumped into a coworker of Emma's at the grocery store. We weren't close, but we'd met a few times at company events and office parties. After some polite small talk, they brought up Emma's work. "She's been working like crazy, huh?" they said. "I guess that's what happens when you're on a big project with someone like Mark. That guy's a perfectionist." There was that name again. Mark. "Yeah, she mentioned the project," I said carefully. "I guess they're spending a lot of time together." The coworker laughed. "Oh, for sure. People in the office joke that they're attached at the hip lately. I mean, I get it, he's charming, and they make a great team. But it's definitely noticeable." I forced a smile, my mind racing. Charming. Attached at the hip. I tried to tell myself it was innocent, but the sinking feeling in my stomach was impossible to ignore. That evening, as Emma came home later than usual, I couldn't stop myself from asking, "How was the breakfast meeting?" I said, keeping my tone light. "Fine," she replied, kicking off her heels. "Nothing exciting. Just a lot of planning for next quarter." "Who all was there?" She paused, glancing at me. "Just the usual people." "Why?" "Just curious," I said, shrugging. "I ran into someone today who mentioned your colleague Mark. Seems like you two have been working pretty closely." Emma's expression flickered for a split second, so quick I almost missed it. But I knew her well enough to recognize when she was caught off guard. "Oh, yeah. Mark's on the project with me," she said casually, grabbing a glass of water. "We've been collaborating a lot lately. He's really detail-oriented, so it's been good for the team." Her explanation sounded reasonable, but something about the way she avoided eye contact made me uneasy. "It's just office gossip," she added quickly. "You know how people love to blow things out of proportion." I nodded, but the doubt lingered. If it was just office gossip, why did she seem so defensive? Over the next week, I found myself growing more suspicious. Emma continued to work late and seemed increasingly distant. Little things started to stand out: how she kept her phone close to her at all times, how she deflected questions about her day, and how she avoided talking about Mark unless I brought him up. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the pieces were starting to add up. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. The worst part was that I didn't know what to do. I wanted to trust Emma, but the cracks in her story were becoming harder to ignore. And as the rumors continued to swirl, I realized that ignoring them wasn't an option anymore. I needed answers, even if I wasn't sure I'd like what I found. The next few weeks felt like walking on eggshells. Emma's schedule remained as hectic as ever: late nights, early mornings, and vague explanations that never seemed to add up. She was distant, distracted, and the warmth that had once defined our relationship felt like it was slipping away. I tried to convince myself that it was just stress. Her job was demanding, and the end of the quarter always brought a flurry of deadlines. But the rumors wouldn't stop haunting me, and with every passing day, they seemed to grow louder. It happened again at a neighborhood barbecue. One of Emma's co-workers, Lisa, was there with her husband. Lisa was the chatty type, always eager to share the latest office news. As we stood by the grill, making small talk, Lisa casually mentioned Mark. "Emma and Mark have been killing it on that big project," she said with a grin. "You'd think they'd known each other for years with how well they work together." "Yeah, she's mentioned him," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Sounds like they've been putting in a lot of hours." Lisa raised an eyebrow, sipping her drink. "Oh, definitely. People in the office joke that they're practically glued at the hip. Not that it's a bad thing, they make a great team. Her words echoed what I'd heard before, but this time, there was something in her tone that made my stomach tighten. People joke about it? I asked, trying to sound casual. Lisa hesitated, then gave a small shrug. You know how office gossip is. People always read into things that probably aren't there. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and I couldn't tell if she was trying to reassure me or warn me. That evening, I couldn't stop replaying Lisa's words. Emma came home late again, looking exhausted. As she set her bag down, I decided to bring it up. I ran into Lisa at the barbecue today, I said as we sat down for dinner. Oh. Emma replied, her tone neutral. She mentioned your project with Mark. Sounds like you two have been spending a lot of time together. Emma's fork paused mid-air, and for a moment, she looked caught off guard. But she quickly recovered, smiling tightly. Yeah, we've been working on the same team for months. It's nothing unusual. People at the office seem to think you're pretty close, I said carefully, watching her reaction. Emma set her fork down, her expression shifting to one of mild annoyance. Liam, it's just gossip. People love to make up stories when they have nothing better to do. Mark and I work well together, that's it. Her dismissal felt rehearsed, but I didn't push further. I didn't want to come across as paranoid, even though my gut told me there was more to the story. The turning point came when I overheard a conversation at the gym. A couple of guys were talking near the lockers, and I caught Emma's name. Yeah, Emma from the corporate team, one of them said. I heard she and Mark have been spending a lot of extra time together, if you know what I mean. My heart sank. I didn't know the guy, and I didn't want to eavesdrop, but his words sent a chill down my spine. Seriously? The other guy asked. She's married, isn't she? Yeah, but you know how these things go. Office relationships happen all the time. I left the gym in a daze, the weight of their words pressing down on me. These weren't just idle rumors anymore. They were spreading, gaining traction, and the implications were impossible to ignore. That night, as Emma worked on her laptop in the living room, I found myself watching her closely. She seemed so focused, so calm, as if nothing was wrong. But the doubts in my mind were impossible to silence. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And if Emma wasn't going to tell me, I realized I'd have to find out for myself. By this point, the rumors were no longer just whispers, they were a constant hum in the back of my mind. I hated feeling suspicious of Emma, but I couldn't shake the growing sense that something was wrong. The little inconsistencies, the vague excuses, the mounting gossip, it was all building into a picture I didn't want to see. I decided it was time to stop second-guessing myself and start finding answers. It started innocently enough. One evening, after Emma went to bed early claiming she was exhausted, I sat down with my laptop and opened her social media. Emma wasn't the type to overshare online, but I thought maybe I could find something, anything, that might help me understand what was going on. Her profiles were pristine, carefully curated with photos from work events, dinners with friends, and the occasional throwback to vacations we'd taken together. At first glance, everything seemed normal. But then I noticed something odd. In one of her recent posts, a group photo from a team-building retreat, there was a man standing next to her, his arm casually draped over her shoulder. He was tall, with dark hair and a confident smile, and though Emma hadn't tagged him, I recognized him immediately. Mark. The caption read, "Great weekend with the team. Hard work and a little fun go a long way." I stared at the photo for a long time, my eyes drawn to the easy familiarity between them. It wasn't definitive proof of anything, but it made my stomach churn. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to Emma's phone. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but I couldn't help noticing how she kept it close, even when she didn't need to. She'd always been a little attached to her devices, part of the job, she'd say, but now it felt different. One night, while she was in the shower, I saw her phone light up on the kitchen counter. A notification popped up, a text message preview from someone named M. Looking forward to tomorrow. Let's make it a good one, smiley face. My chest tightened. I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't need to. M could only be Mark. I stared at the screen, debating whether to unlock her phone. My heart raced as I weighed my options. Finally, I took a deep breath and stepped away. I didn't want to cross that line, not yet. Instead, I decided to follow her. The next day, Emma mentioned she had a late meeting with her team and wouldn't be home until after 9 p.m. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving, her smile easy and unbothered. I waited for half an hour before grabbing my keys and heading out. I didn't have a concrete plan, but I knew where her office was, and I figured I'd start there. When I arrived, the parking lot was mostly empty, save for a few scattered cars. I parked at the edge of the lot, my heart pounding as I scanned the area. After a few minutes, I saw her. Emma was walking out of the building, her posture relaxed, her bag slung over one shoulder. She wasn't alone. Mark was beside her. They were laughing about something, their conversation animated as they walked toward his car. He opened the passenger door for her, and she slid inside without hesitation. I sat frozen in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I watched them drive away. That night, Emma came home around 9:30, just as she'd said she would. She greeted me with a tired smile, her demeanor as casual as ever. "Long day," she said, kicking off her shoes. I nodded, forcing myself to act normal. "You hungry?" "I made pasta." "Thanks, but I grabbed a bite at the office," she replied, heading toward the bedroom. Her words felt like knives. She lied so easily, so naturally, and I couldn't believe I'd missed it for so long. I knew then that the rumors weren't just rumors. Something was happening, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what I might find next. But one thing was clear, I couldn't ignore it any longer. After seeing Emma leave with Mark, I couldn't sit on the sidelines any longer. The lies had piled up, and I knew I had to confront whatever was happening between them. But first, I needed proof, something irrefutable that would force her to tell me the truth. The following day, I decided to dig deeper. Emma's behavior had become a pattern, vague explanations, late nights, and an air of detachment that was impossible to ignore. That evening, while she was taking another long shower, I picked up her phone. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. She'd never changed her passcode, probably assuming I wouldn't go through her things. I opened her messages and scrolled through her recent conversations. Most were innocent, chats with friends, group threads with coworkers, but then I found the one I was looking for. Mark. My heart raced as I opened the thread. Their conversation was casual at first, discussions about work deadlines and team updates, but it didn't take long for the tone to shift. "Mark, you looked amazing today. That dress was perfect on you." "Emma, flattery will get you everywhere, lol. But thank you, smiley face." "Mark, I mean it. You're stunning." "Emma, you're sweet." My stomach churned as I scrolled further. Their messages became more personal, filled with inside jokes and compliments that went beyond professionalism. The most recent exchange made my blood run cold. "Mark, can't wait to see you tomorrow. Let's grab dinner after the meeting, just us." "Emma, sounds good. Same place as last time." "Mark, of course, winky face. Last time." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't hold it in any longer. When Emma came out of the bathroom, I was sitting on the bed, her phone in my hand. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but cold. She froze, her eyes darting between me and the phone. "What's going on?" "I went through your messages," I said, holding up the phone. With Mark. Her face drained of color. Liam, Don't, I interrupted, my voice rising. Don't lie to me, Emma. I saw everything. The texts, the dinner plans, the flirting, it's all there. So, tell me the truth. What's going on between you two? She sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. It's not what you think, she said, her voice shaky. Then explain it to me, I said, my anger bubbling over. Because it looks a hell of a lot like you're having an affair. She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. We've been spending time together, yes, but it's not serious. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just got out of control. Her words were like a slap in the face. Not serious. I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. Do you hear yourself? You've been lying to me for weeks, no, months, sneaking around, going on dates, and you're telling me it's not serious? She broke down, burying her face in her hands. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I don't know what I was thinking. I was stressed, overwhelmed, and he was there. He made me feel seen, Liam. I didn't mean to hurt you. Her excuses felt hollow, but the pain in her voice was real. Why didn't you just talk to me? I asked, my voice cracking. If you felt like something was missing, why didn't you tell me instead of running to him? I don't know, she whispered. I was scared. I didn't want to admit that I wasn't happy. The confrontation left me shattered. Emma's tears, her apologies, her attempts to explain, it all felt like too little, too late. I need some time to think, I said finally, standing up. I can't do this right now. She nodded, her face streaked with tears. Take all the time you need. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. As I walked out of the bedroom, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me, anger, sadness, betrayal. The woman I thought I knew had been keeping secrets, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just about the affair. It was about the cracks in our relationship that had allowed it to happen. And I wasn't sure if those cracks could ever be repaired. The days that followed were some of the hardest I'd ever experienced. I stayed at a friend's house for a couple of nights, trying to sort through the storm of emotions that Emma's confession had unleashed. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the messages, the playful banter, the flirtation, the plans for secret dinners. Emma tried to reach out several times. She sent texts and left voicemails, each one filled with apologies and pleas for a chance to explain herself further. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to hear her voice. When I finally went home, Emma was waiting for me in the kitchen. She looked tired, her eyes red from crying, and she didn't say anything as I set my bag down and sat at the table. I meant what I said, she began quietly. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Her words hung in the air, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Instead, I stared at the table, my mind racing with questions. How long had this been going on? How much of our marriage had been a lie? Why him? I asked finally, my voice low. Emma hesitated, twisting her hands together. I don't know, she said. He was just there. He listened to me, made me feel important. And I was so stressed with work, with everything, and I didn't feel like I could talk to you. Her words stung, but they also forced me to confront a harsh truth. We'd stopped talking to each other long before Mark entered the picture. That doesn't excuse what you did, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I know, she said quickly. I know I messed up, Liam. And I hate myself for it. I don't want to lose you. Over the next week, we had several tense conversations. Emma told me everything, how the flirtation had started innocently enough, how it had escalated over time, and how she'd justified it to herself as harmless until it wasn't. I never wanted to hurt you, she said during one of our talks. I didn't think it would go this far. But it did, I replied, the anger bubbling up again. And now here we are. Emma nodded, her expression filled with regret. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me. One evening, she brought up the idea of therapy. I've been looking into couples counseling, she said hesitantly. I think it could help us figure out where we go from here. I stared at her, unsure how to respond. The thought of sitting in a room with a stranger, unpacking the mess of our marriage, felt overwhelming. But at the same time, I didn't want to make any rash decisions. Maybe, I said finally. Emma's eyes filled with cautious hope. Thank you, she said softly. Despite her efforts to make amends, the pain of her betrayal was still fresh. I found myself withdrawing, avoiding her whenever possible. I didn't trust her, and I wasn't sure if I ever could again. But there was a part of me that wasn't ready to give up just yet. We had 12 years of history together, and while her actions had shattered my trust, I couldn't ignore the love that still lingered beneath the surface. The question was whether that love was enough to rebuild what had been broken. For now, all I knew was that the road ahead would be long and uncertain. And I wasn't sure if either of us was ready for the journey. Reluctantly, I agreed to Emma's suggestion of therapy. I wasn't convinced it would help, but I also knew we couldn't keep circling the same arguments without finding some kind of resolution. If there was any hope of salvaging our marriage, we needed a mediator, someone who could help us untangle the mess we'd created. The first session felt like stepping into the unknown. We sat in a small, quiet room with Dr. Riley, a middle-aged man with a calming presence and a no-nonsense demeanor. He began by asking us to share why we were there, letting each of us speak without interruption. Emma went first, her voice trembling as she recounted the affair, her guilt, and her desire to make things right. She didn't sugarcoat her actions or try to shift blame, which surprised me. I betrayed Liam's trust, she said, her hands clenched in her lap. I made choices that hurt him, and I hate that I've put us here. But I want to fight for our marriage, if he'll let me. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath, unsure how to put my feelings into words. I don't know if I can forgive her, I admitted. I don't know if I even want to try. I feel like everything I thought we had has been destroyed, and I don't know how to move forward from that. Dr. Riley nodded, his expression thoughtful. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, he said. Rebuilding it after a betrayal like this is incredibly difficult. But it's not impossible. The question is whether you're both willing to do the work, even if it's painful. Emma nodded immediately, her expression resolute. I hesitated before giving a reluctant nod. I don't know if it'll make a difference, I said, but I'm here, and I'll try. The sessions were emotionally exhausting, forcing us to confront issues we'd avoided for years. Dr. Riley encouraged us to talk openly about the cracks in our relationship that had allowed Emma's affair to happen. You stopped talking to me, Emma said during one session, her voice heavy with emotion. I felt invisible, like I wasn't a priority anymore. And instead of telling you how I felt, I made the wrong choice. Her words stung, but they also rang true. I'd thrown myself into my work, assuming our marriage could coast on autopilot. I hadn't noticed how distant we'd become until it was too late. That doesn't excuse what you did, I said, my tone firm but calm. I know, she replied. And I'll never stop regretting it. Outside of therapy, Emma continued to show me that she was serious about rebuilding my trust. She stopped working late, started coming home earlier, and kept her phone out in the open without hesitation. I want to be transparent, she told me one evening. I know I have to earn your trust back, and I'll do whatever it takes. Her efforts didn't erase the pain, but they did chip away at the wall I'd built around myself. Dr. Riley also encouraged us to focus on reconnecting in small ways, things that reminded us of the bond we'd once shared. We started spending more time together, going for walks, cooking meals, and even watching old movies we used to love. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the anger and sadness resurfaced, threatening to derail our progress. But each time, Emma remained patient, acknowledging my feelings without defensiveness. "You're allowed to be angry," she said during one of our tougher conversations. "I'll take it, as long as it means we're still trying." Her sincerity caught me off guard. For the first time, I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward for us. Therapy had opened a door, but walking through it was another matter entirely. Trust was still fragile, and the weight of Emma's betrayal lingered over everything we did. But I noticed changes in her, small, consistent efforts that showed me she was serious about rebuilding what we'd lost. She started prioritizing our time together in a way she hadn't in years. She suggested weekly, date nights, even if it was just a quiet dinner at home or a walk in the park. At first, it felt awkward, like we were trying too hard to recreate something that no longer existed. But gradually, those moments began to feel more natural. One evening, we cooked dinner together, something we hadn't done in ages. She was chopping vegetables while I handled the stove, and for a brief moment, the rhythm of working side by side felt almost comforting. "Do you remember the first meal we ever cooked together?" she asked, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Spaghetti," I said without hesitation. "And we burned the garlic bread because we got distracted talking." Emma laughed, the sound light and genuine. "I think that was the moment I realized I wanted to marry you." Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The memory was a good one, but it was hard to reconcile it with the hurt I still felt. "I miss those days," she added softly. "Me too," I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. Therapy also pushed us to address the unspoken emotions that had built up over time. Dr. Riley encouraged me to express my anger and sadness openly, rather than burying it under the surface. "I'm still hurt," I told Emma during one session. "And I don't know when, or if, that feeling will ever go away." "I understand," she replied, her voice steady. "And I'll be here, however long it takes." Her willingness to face the consequences of her actions without defensiveness began to shift something in me. It didn't erase what she'd done, but it showed me that she was committed to making things right. One weekend, Emma suggested we tackle a home project together, repainting the living room. It was something we talked about doing for years but had never gotten around to. As we worked side by side, the tension that had hung between us began to ease. We laughed at our clumsiness, splattering paint on each other and joking about our lack of DIY skills. By the time we finished, the room was a soft shade of blue, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of accomplishment, together. "This feels good," I admitted as we admired our work. Emma nodded, her smile tinged with hope. "It does. I want more of this with you." Despite the progress we were making, I still had moments of doubt. There were nights when I lay awake, replaying everything in my mind, the rumors, the messages, the lies. It was a cycle that felt impossible to break. But then there were other moments, small, fleeting glimpses of the life we'd once had, that reminded me why I was still trying. Emma wasn't the same person she'd been when the affair started, and neither was I. The question wasn't whether we could go back to the way things were. It was whether we could create something new, something stronger. For the first time, I started to believe that maybe we could. As weeks turned into months, Emma and I found ourselves navigating a delicate balance between rebuilding trust and rediscovering our connection. Therapy had helped us establish the foundation, but it was the moments outside those sessions, the everyday choices, that truly began to change things. Emma's efforts were consistent. She kept her phone open and in plain sight, no longer guarding it like a secret. She told me about her day without me asking, including details about her colleagues and her schedule. Small as they seemed, those gestures meant more to me than she probably realized. One afternoon, she came home with a surprise: tickets to a local art exhibit. "I thought we could go this weekend," she said, her voice tentative. You always said you wanted to see more of the city's art scene. I was skeptical at first. It felt like another attempt to make up for what had happened. But when the weekend came, I decided to go. The exhibit was quiet and intimate, filled with abstract paintings and sculptures that sparked conversations we hadn't had in years. Emma seemed genuinely engaged, asking for my opinions and sharing her thoughts in a way that reminded me of the woman I'd fallen in love with. As we walked back to the car that evening, I found myself smiling, an unguarded, genuine smile. It wasn't a grand moment, but it felt like progress. Emma noticed. "Thank you for coming with me," she said softly. "I enjoyed it," I admitted. "It was nice." She reached for my hand, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't pull away. Back home, I realized how much I'd missed those moments of connection. It didn't erase the hurt, but it gave me hope that we were capable of finding something good again. Emma continued to show me that she was committed to making things work. She suggested we take a short trip together, a weekend getaway to a nearby cabin. I hesitated at first, unsure if we were ready for something like that, but eventually, I agreed. The cabin was nestled in the woods, surrounded by towering trees and the calming sound of a nearby stream. Without the distractions of work and technology, we spent our time hiking, cooking simple meals, and sitting by the fire. One evening, as we watched the flames flicker in the fireplace, Emma turned to me. "I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry, Liam. For everything. For hurting you, for breaking your trust, for all of it." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were filled with tears. "I know," I said, my voice quiet. "And I'm still angry. But I'm also starting to believe that you're sorry. That you mean it." She nodded, her tears spilling over. "I do. And I'll keep proving it, every day, for as long as it takes." We sat in silence for a while, the crackling fire filling the space between us. For the first time in months, I felt a small but significant shift in my heart. We weren't fixed, not by a long shot. But we were trying. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. Returning from the cabin felt like a turning point, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Something about the simplicity of that weekend, no distractions, no outside noise, had given me clarity. Emma and I weren't perfect, but we were beginning to rebuild something real, piece by piece. At home, the changes we'd been working toward became more noticeable. Emma continued to prioritize our time together, making deliberate choices to show she was committed. She scaled back her late nights and even declined a few work events, something she never would have done before. "I realized I need to start saying no," she told me one evening as we cooked dinner. "Work isn't more important than us." Her words surprised me. For so long, her career had been the driving force in her life. Hearing her shift her focus felt like proof of her determination to rebuild what we'd lost. Our therapy sessions also began to take on a different tone. Instead of focusing solely on the past, Dr. Riley encouraged us to talk about the future, our goals, our hopes, and the life we wanted to create together. "What do you want your relationship to look like a year from now?" he asked us one session. Emma spoke first. "I want us to be closer than we've ever been. I want Liam to know he can trust me again, that he's the most important person in my life." I hesitated, unsure how to put my feelings into words. "I want to feel like we're a team again," I said finally. "Like we're building something together instead of just going through the motions." Dr. Riley nodded. "Those are strong goals. Now it's about taking steps, big and small, to get there." One of those steps was finding new ways to connect. Emma and I started making a habit of trying new things together, hiking trails, experimenting with recipes, even taking a pottery class at the local community center. One evening, as we sat at the pottery wheels, laughing at our lopsided creations, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: joy. It wasn't forced or fleeting. It was real. You're terrible at this, Emma teased, holding up a misshapen bowl. Speak for yourself, I shot back, gesturing to her equally disastrous face. For a moment, it felt like the weight of everything we'd been through lifted, replaced by a lightness I hadn't thought we'd find again. There were still moments of doubt, times when the memories of her betrayal crept back into my mind uninvited. But each time, Emma met me with patience and understanding. One night, as we sat on the couch, I asked her a question that had been lingering in my mind. Do you regret it? Her expression softened, and she reached for my hand. I regret hurting you more than anything, she said. But I also think it forced me to realize how much I was taking you for granted. I don't ever want to lose you, Liam. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Her honesty caught me off guard, but it also gave me a sense of reassurance. Slowly, I began to see Emma in a new light. She wasn't just the woman who had hurt me, she was also the woman who was working tirelessly to make things right. And while the scars of her betrayal would always be there, I started to believe that they didn't have to define us. We weren't the same people we'd been before the affair, but maybe that was a good thing. Maybe this version of us, more honest, more aware, had a chance to be even stronger. Time didn't erase what had happened, but it gave me space to process it. As the months passed, the sharp edges of my anger and hurt began to soften, replaced by something I hadn't expected, clarity. Emma and I had faced something that could have destroyed us, yet here we were, still standing. Her actions continued to show me that she was serious about rebuilding trust. She went out of her way to be transparent, from leaving her phone out in the open to including me in her work life in ways she never had before. I noticed small changes too, how she'd check in with me during the day, asking about my schedule and suggesting we meet for lunch. One afternoon, as we sat in a quiet cafe near my office, Emma said something that stayed with me. I know I'll never undo the damage I caused, she said, stirring her coffee. But I hope I can prove to you that I'm worth trusting again. I looked at her, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes. You're trying, I said simply. And that means a lot. It wasn't a grand declaration of forgiveness, but it was the truth. At therapy, Dr. Riley encouraged me to explore what forgiveness might look like, not as a way to excuse Emma's actions, but as a way to free myself from the weight of the betrayal. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or condoning, he said. It's about choosing to let go of the pain so you can move forward. His words resonated with me. For so long, I'd been holding on to the anger, letting it define my every interaction with Emma. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't want to carry that burden anymore. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I turned to Emma. I think I'm ready to forgive you, I said, my voice steady. She froze, her eyes wide. You mean that? I do, I said. But it doesn't mean everything's fixed. It just means I'm choosing to let go of the anger. We still have work to do, but I think we can get there. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. Thank you, Liam. I promise I won't take this for granted. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace, a lightness I hadn't experienced in months. As we sat there, hand in hand, I realized that forgiveness wasn't just for Emma. It was for me too. It allowed me to reclaim my sense of self, to focus on the future instead of being trapped in the past. We weren't perfect, and we never would be. But we were moving forward, one step at a time. A year after everything came crashing down, I found myself reflecting on how far we'd come. Emma and I weren't the same couple we'd been before her betrayal. In many ways, that was a good thing. The cracks that had been hidden beneath the surface of our marriage were now out in the open, and we'd worked hard to fill them with something stronger. The trust we'd rebuilt wasn't perfect, but it was real. Emma continued to prioritize transparency, going out of her way to show me that she had nothing to hide. Her efforts didn't feel forced anymore, they felt genuine, part of the new foundation we were creating together. I'd grown too. Therapy had helped me process my emotions in ways I never thought possible. It taught me that vulnerability wasn't a weakness and that letting go of anger didn't mean forgetting what had happened. It meant choosing to focus on what mattered, the life Emma and I were still building. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Emma handed me a small notebook. "I've been journaling again," she said softly. "About us, about everything I've learned. I want you to read it, if you're ready." I hesitated for a moment before taking it. Her journal had once been a symbol of the secrecy that had nearly destroyed us. Now, it felt like an offering of trust. Later that night, I opened it. The entries were raw and honest, filled with her reflections on the mistakes she'd made, the pain she'd caused, and the gratitude she felt for the second chance I'd given her. One line stood out: "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'll spend every day earning it." For the first time, I felt like I truly understood her remorse, not just as words, but as actions. Our lives weren't perfect, but they were fuller now. We made time for each other in ways we hadn't before: date nights, spontaneous trips, quiet evenings just talking. We rediscovered the joy in small things, like cooking dinner together or walking through the neighborhood at sunset. Emma's career had shifted too. She stepped back from some of the high-pressure projects that had consumed her before, focusing instead on finding a better balance between work and home. As for me, I learned to speak up, to share my feelings instead of burying them. It wasn't always easy, but it made a difference. Emma listened, really listened, and that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. One evening, as we stood on the deck watching the stars, I turned to her. "Do you think we're stronger now?" I asked. She looked at me, her eyes filled with warmth. "I think we're more honest now," she said. "And that makes us stronger." I nodded, realizing she was right. The betrayal had scarred us, but it had also forced us to confront the parts of our marriage that weren't working. It made us face the truth, even when it was painful, and in doing so, it gave us a chance to start over. As I held her hand, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. We weren't perfect, but we were trying, and that was enough. The past would always be a part of our story, but it didn't have to define our future. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful for us, for the life we were rebuilding, and for the lessons we'd learned along the way. Together, we were writing a new chapter, and this time, it felt like a story worth telling.